Hey, everybody. I'm Jake McAfee, and I'm here with another episode of the Fort Wayne Local Podcast. Today, I'm joined by restaurateur James Kahn. James, how you doing?
Good. How you doing,
Good,
Jake?
good. Hey, everything's good. So before we jump in, I kind of want to we got a lot of new listeners on the podcast. The reason I started this podcast is for years I was very critical of the media. I always felt like they had a bias or an agenda, and I was the type of person who basically did nothing about it. I just complained. And so finally one day I said, I had a good look in the mirror and I said, if I'm going to keep complaining, I either need to stop or I need to do something. And so my do something was the podcast. And I want to make sure that whatever's going on, everybody has a fair voice and a platform. And so, in the spirit of that, that's why we're doing this interview today. So, almost 2,000 of you watched that interview I posted on Saturday with Jimmy Schindler. It was a great interview. I was very appreciative of his time. And it was about the new proposed food and beverage tax. Well, Jimmy was very opposed to it for anyone who listened, and James supports it. And I wanted to have him on and give us some facts, give us his background, kind of let us know why it's a good thing for Fort Wayne in his opinion, and then the citizens of Fort Wayne can make up their mind from there. So before we start, I want to say James is a married father of two. He was a Purdue guy, which I actually wore I don't know if you can see the quarter zip, wore
Oh,
that
nice.
today. Yeah. And he's involved in many local charities. He volunteers at his children's school, and he's the president of Obi Kai Restaurant Group, and they manage BakerStreet Steakhouse, the Hoppy Gnome, Gnometown Brewing, and Proximo, some of the best restaurants in town. So, again, James, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah.
Okay, let's jump in. I want to talk about reviewing the history of the tax, like I did with Jimmy, just to make sure I have everything correct. My understanding of the food and beverage tax was that it was a 1% tax that was added to the industry to help expand the Coliseum, and they said it was going to be temporary, and it ended up being permanent. Is that your understanding?
Pretty much. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that it was. They, I don't know if it's permanent. There's sunsets in the tax, but it probably not something that we're gonna see soon.
Sure.
So semi-permanent is probably pretty accurate.
Okay. I just want to make sure I had that. And then, okay, so that brings us to today. The proposal is to take it from 1% and add another 1% of sales. Is that correct? So it'd be another penny on the dollar.
Yeah. So that's the I wouldn't. That's going to be that's what they went to ask permission to do, but they're not actually asking to do that yet. So apparently, and I'm not great with politics, but apparently you have to first get permission from the state, and then you have to have your city request that later down the way. But you can't have your city do that unless you have permission from the state first. So I don't know if it's on the table at this point to increase it. Um, they ran down there to get permission. So, um, but yes, if they get permission, it'll go from 1% to 2%. In a slight variation, the 1% is a county tax for Allen County. The extra percentage would just be within the city of Fort Wayne,
Okay.
so it wouldn't spread out to the entire county.
Okay. That's a good distinction that I didn't realize actually. So, and why are we just hearing about it now? Because the way it's being pitched from its opposers is that it was this kind of clandestine, trying to sneak it in there thing. Is that what you understand, or what's your understanding of how this played out and where it came from?
So I don't think that I don't understand it that way. I There was a semi-public announcement on December 3rd. So I was in a meeting with the mayor and local leaders, and the only reason I was in the meeting, I think, is to represent the restaurant industry. So of the 30 to 40 people that were in there was myself, I believe Todd Holman from Pizza Hut, Bill Bean from Main Street and Summit Grill and 8 Grill. There's a on Wall Street. It's like Pub 1802, I think it's called, and the Fish House. And there might have been one more person. Oh, Tim DeBeers from Debrand. So they had a group of us on the call. And the only reason we were on the call was to say, to offer our opinion on what this would look like for the restaurant industry. So they talked about the benefits of it and the opportunity to ask permission to do it. And then they kind of gave us the forum to say, what are our thoughts? But the main focus was, is this something that's going to harm the restaurant industry if we do it? Because if not, we don't want to do it. And all of the community leaders that were on there, so Chuck Surak, Tom Kelly, all the people that are out there speaking now, were adamant that they didn't want to support it unless it had restaurant support. So that was December 3rd. I'm the loudest mouthed person, I think, in the world. So I got appointed to contact restaurants to try to determine who was in and who would be out, who's wanted to learn more. So from December 3rd until right before that, the mayor and Tom Kelly went down to the state to ask permission. That's what I was doing. I had contacted probably 40 or 50 people, Jimmy, from Banditos, and Panos from Salvatore's, and Black Cannon, a lot of the restaurant groups that are opposing it, and a lot of the ones that I think I sent you an email for the restaurants that are supporting it, which I think is maybe 25 or 30 as well. But the idea was that we were going to get all the restaurants together, and then have the city, or have Greater Fort Wayne, present the reasons why we should be considering raising our tax as a city, and to give feedback. So when Jimmy and I met, we sat down for a couple hours, and he gave me a lot of insight to the history of the food and beverage tax that I was unaware, but that he's privileged to, as being a lifelong Fort Wayne restaurateur family. And one thing I had assured him is that, listen, I think that this should be done differently, because I'm not a politician, and let's do this all together so everyone's voices can be heard. And then I don't know what happened, that there was a rush to go apply. I think that had something to do with the city of Hobart, or somebody in the northwest region of Indiana asking permission and us needing to tack on with them. But I don't know the logistics of why it had to be rushed. But I do know that 4 or 5 days before that happened, we were getting things lined up for Greater Fort Wayne to do a presentation and trying to get everyone's email addresses. So I have a list of 5 pages of restaurants that I was trying to coordinate to all get on the same call, which is a little bit daunting. So, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all. I was just going to say, so then why are you supporting it? I mean, just to kind of cut right to the chase, if I think the optics right now are the restaurant industry is battered, and now we're adding a tax to what they're doing. This seems terrible.
Yeah, for sure.
And so what's your view of it as a restaurant owner? Obviously, you're not going to do something you think is going to harm yourself, or the rest of the industry. What are you seeing that makes you want to support it?
Well, one, I mean, the restaurant industry is battered. I mean, there's no denying that. But we've also been bailed out from these PPP loans. I think you'd have a hard time finding a restaurateur that would be an opponent to the PPP loan process. They saved our restaurants. We went from bankruptcy to solvency over the course of getting approved. And the second round of PPP loans is going to make sure that we stay solvent at least for the next year, which should be enough time to get us through this pandemic. So I find it personally, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but personally, I feel like I'd be a hypocrite, to say I'm opposed to taxes and government intervention when my company would not be here if it wasn't for government intervention. But for our city, the food and beverage tax has been used time and time again, because like you said, it was originally supposed to be for the Coliseum. And in 2000, I believe they redirected it to be able to be used for community-based projects in Allen County. So we wouldn't have Promenade Park, we wouldn't have Electric Works, we wouldn't have the downtown stadium. We would have lost Do It Best Corp. We would have lost BAE Systems. So these huge economic drivers that we all benefit from would be gone if it wasn't for the ability that we have as a city to use this food and beverage tax in order to incentivize businesses to stay. So obviously, as a restaurant, I haven't gotten those same benefits. We've been a pass-through entity in order to facilitate those things happening. But I don't think it hurts us, because in 1992 it was enacted. There was, I think, maybe $289 million in revenue, $295 million in revenue in 1992 from the food and beverage industry just from Allen County. So 2018 is the last year I've found statistics for, and there's $783 million of revenue in Allen County. So that's 165% increase over the course of almost 30 years. And there was never, there were 4 years where revenue decreased year over year, 2000, 2002, 2008, and 2009. So 2002 after 9/11, 2008 and 9 during the economic recession. I can't justify 2000, but it was a 1% drop. So the industry as a whole clearly hasn't been affected by the 1% tax. And I try to think of things rationally. And I live on the county line, near county line between Whitley and Allen County. And I can't ever think of a time of someone telling me that they don't want to go to the McDonald's on Scott Road because they don't want to pay 1% Allen County tax. Instead, they're going to drive to McDonald's in Columbia City. And I don't see it being an issue. I think Jimmy brings up good points that if we have to pay if a guest has to pay a 1% tax, that's just 1 penny less per 100 or per dollar that they have to spend. I don't know how many guests are sitting down and calculating, well, I'm going to tip your server 19% because I had to pay a 1% tax. Most people have enough difficulty getting, figuring out percentages as it is. So I just don't see that the impact to us as a restaurant industry maybe the same way as Jimmy might. And I definitely see the impact in our community. And if that means that we have to suffer a higher burden or have an extra step to do, because as a restaurant, you're collecting sales tax and food and beverage tax anyways. All you're doing is changing a percentage, and then all of it goes from the guests to the city or the state. I think it's a small thing to ask in order to ensure that our community has things around it that want to attract visitors to come and want to attract businesses to come and people to stay. Because I'd love for my daughters to want to live in Fort Wayne. And you're probably younger than me, but when I was growing up, the common perception amongst all of us was, can't wait to get out of Fort Wayne.
I went to Orlando for 12 years, so I do know what you're saying. Right. And so if I'm hearing you correctly, just to kind of make it concise, so basically you're saying this tax will become an investment that will grow the city, and in turn we'll all be more prosperous because we have more to offer as a city, even though in the short term maybe it's a little bit less. It's basically investing people's money for them, essentially, like it's pooling community money to be an investment. Is that kind of
without a doubt?
Okay.
And I don't know if everyone knows this too, but the reason that it became a necessary thing was that Electric Works, I don't know how many years they tried to get funding to get that completed. It was trying to get funding, and we extended deadline for whatever the city was going to match, until the city finally said, no more, we can't extend this deadline any further. And then there was a huge outcry for Save Electric Works. Well, they took money that was in the food and beverage tax fund, the capital improvement board, and invested that to Save Electric Works. which basically ran up that entire fund. So it was 45%, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I believe it's 45% of what was in that fund to save electric works. So now it's all tapped out for the next 5 years at a time when we have the best opportunity in our history to attract further development into Fort Wayne, when you have other communities that are cracking down and you have businesses fleeing, looking for a place to go. So
gotcha. So you're saying you got to pick, like, we can't have our cake and eat it too. We either have to kind of invest in this, which means everybody's going to have to pull together via tax, or we don't have this investment, which could have long-term negative impacts on the city.
Right. Yeah. I should hire you to be my PR. You take 10 minutes of my talk and put it in 10 seconds.
No, you're doing good, man. Okay. And so what are some misconceptions? I think we've kind of touched on some of them, but either the tax or even Mayor Henry, I think, I was reading the comments section, which is always a dangerous thing to do, but he was getting crushed. And so, what would you say to people maybe who are being critical of Mayor Henry?
I would challenge them to try to find the ulterior point than what they're seeing, to see if they can balance out their view. Personally, I wouldn't say that, I go play checkers with the mayor every Saturday or anything. It's not like we're best friends, but I know him well enough to know that he actually cares about the city. I think it's really unfair that he's kind of getting painted in this clandestine light, that he's trying to subvert and do things without people knowing, when the way that he handled it would have been the way I would have tried to do it. Say, hey, let's find out first if this is even something that we can do without affecting our city's valued assets, these restaurants. And again, I don't know what the impetus was that forced them to go down and apply, but I do know for a fact that was not in the plans. They were really trying to get together with all the restaurants, and then so for whatever reason, he's had to hurry up and go do that, and now it looks like he's trying to fly under the radar, when in fact he had spent months trying to do the research to talk to the right people. So it's just sad to me, but I have the benefit of having had those conversations and tried to reach out to some of the restaurants. So I honestly do believe him in his sincerity, that he doesn't want to do this until he sees that the restaurant industry is doing better. And again, Jimmy, I think, breaks up good points. So who decides when the restaurant's doing better? And I don't have an answer for that, because we're not all the same. He also mentioned fast food restaurants are doing great, and they are. Sit down restaurants are getting hurt. So when does that happen? I don't know, but I do know that a better solution comes with us working together, like working with the city, with the mayor, as a group of restaurateurs, to say, let's set these benchmarks. And again, I can't speak for him in that realm, but I can't imagine that he would be opposed to that. He's done a lot, even with the county, with the current restrictions, to try to ensure that the hospitality industry has a seat at the table. So I see him working, and it's really just not fair that everybody else doesn't get that benefit to see what he does behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate part of being in the public eye. And I think an important distinction, if I'm hearing it correctly, is that he wasn't trying to sneak down there and pass this thing. He was trying to start the process to even bring it to the table to be discussed.
Yeah.
That's correct?
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. It's not. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and speaking of, you were mentioned, sit down restaurants. So I think a big question is, how do you see this affecting your employees? Because I think the fear is that this is going to negatively affect, servers, cooks, busboys, etc., that type of thing.
So I don't know that I see it that way. The way that it works in most restaurants, especially sit down restaurants, is the busboys, the cooks, the bartenders are all getting a percentage of the sales, and servers are getting obviously a percentage of sales by way of tips. But in my experience, probably 19 out of 20 people just tip on the total that they're paying.
Mhm.
So if I have a bill that's $100 and I have $8 in taxes under the current format, I'm I'm tipping on $108. So I'm going to tip you $21 more than likely to get my 20%.
Mhm.
I don't see very many people tipping on the subtotal. Um, and the ones that I do are typically corporations that have a budget or something to that effect. So
Mhm.
it, I wouldn't say this like as a, stamp and write it in stone, but my assumption is that it'll actually benefit the servers because more people tip off the total. So instead of tipping off 108, they'll be tipping off 109.
Mhm.
So I don't know if the 20 cents, well, I'm not gonna say that. 20 cents per table adds up. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So but I think that it'll have a net positive effect at the worst, personally.
Okay. And I think that goes to some of the stats you pulled up on increasing sales, because at the end of the day, that's, I guess, what matters here is this going to affect sales? Is it going to hurt or help? And if statistically it has not hurt sales, you're saying, then, there's a net gain here and it's not going to hurt our sales.
Yeah, I think so. And I think one of the opponent view is that it would all go downtown. And I mean, I don't see it that way. I think that they're really trying to develop the other outlying areas of Fort Wayne.
Mhm.
Southeast in particular, I think that has been in the conversations of every economic planning that I've been a part of. And um, coming from the southeast side of town where I grew up, I'm really eager to see that come to fruition. And the, the more people are going out to eat, like you said, even in some hypothetical situation where I'm tipping now 19% instead of 20, or if I'm tipping again 12%, I just don't see that happening. I can tell you without a doubt, our staff is making 20% on the amount after taxes because we make our staff claim all their tips. So, but if the sales are higher in a day because we have 10 more people coming in than we did last year, then again, it's a net positive. So,
Okay. I think this all makes a lot of sense. I think you laid out your case pretty well. Is there anything else you want to add before we start to wrap up here?
no, I no, I appreciate just the forum, and I do appreciate it, all the restaurants that most of the restaurants Jimmy mentioned. I'm friends with those guys, and we're all in this together. So the great thing about I think Fort Wayne and this community is that we can disagree on some things and still have a commonality in what our goals are and the way we want to live life. So there are probably another 25 or 30 restaurants that haven't been highly publicized that do support it. So it seems to me we're kind of split on this, almost 50-50 from the ones that we have responses from.
Okay, I'll do what I did with Jimmy's interview, and I'll link all the restaurants that support it in there. And for the record, Jimmy actually, after we finished, recommended that I reach out to you and spoke very highly of you. And he said he has a different opinion here, but he's someone you should talk to. So I thought that was cool.
Oh yeah.
And so I like to wrap up every interview. What's your favorite thing about living in Fort Wayne?
Uh, Honestly, I love that it's a big little town. Now, Reno has kind of trademarked that name, but I think we have a case. It's the biggest little town in the country, in my opinion. And um, like you said, I mean, there are people here that care about each other. So Jimmy, I think it's very kind for him to speak highly of me like that. I think highly of him as well. Um, and I think it's such a unique place to be where people can love on each other without having to agree on 100% of everything. So I just pray my kids want to grow up here and be close here because I don't have any aspirations of leaving. So,
Yeah, me either. I'm sure they'll go
right.
through a too cool phase and then hopefully they come back, But
Yeah,
that's
hopefully,
just
unless we
how
can
it
make
is.
it cool enough for them here.
That's a good
Right.
point. That's a good point. So how can people learn more about you? How can they learn more about your restaurants if they want to connect with you?
We have a decent social media presence. So BakerStreet, Proximo, Hoppy Gnome, Gnometown Brewing, they all have Facebook and websites. And best way to, I guess, learn more about me is just come in and say hi. Well, I say that I can only be in one place at a time, so I tend to bounce around a lot. But I don't know. Ask around. I've been here 40 years, and most people, I don't know if most people know me, but You can probably find out just asking somebody, and I talk a lot, as you can see. So someone knows something about me all the time.
Sure. Well, again, James, I really appreciate your time. I hope everybody appreciates having a different point of view. And as we said off air, I'd love to do this again where we can talk a little bit more about your journey. And I promise I won't bring up taxes like one time throughout the whole thing. So we'll do this again. And thank you very much.
No, thank you, Jake. I appreciate it. Take care.
All right. See ya.